Scotia. Grow-in goes further than protecting a cured benefit. It actually requires that the employers, and in many cases members, make contributions which may ultimately not be required to fund the benefits of the plan. And in conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the President of the Federation of Labour states, we hereby request that the province of Nova Scotia amend the Pension Benefits Act of Nova Scotia by removing the grow-in requirements. Mr. Speaker, clearly the Federation of Labour supports this legislation, despite the letter of apology that was issued yesterday by the leader of the Federation of Labour to his NDP caucus colleagues. Mr. Speaker, well, it's a noted fact. It's even documented in the public newspapers that he attends on a regular basis the NDP caucus meetings. He's a brother, that's what they say. Well, that's fine, they can call him whatever they want. The fact of the matter is, as legislators, we are not here just to cater to one interest group, but to the interest of all Nova Scotians. And that includes even the membership of the Federation of Labour.
You can be everything to everybody. You're a liberal.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is the first time I've actually seen the NDP and the Federation of Labour line up for public apologies for political purposes. This legislation may not be perfect. Yes, it is a shame. It is a shame that the President of the Federation of Labour has sold out his membership for the NDP agenda. And maybe only in time we'll get a clearer indication of where they're going with it. Yes. Well, that's a brilliant deduction. We have a leadership campaign in 2 weeks' time, and he says we're waiting for a new leader. He's very observant, that young man. Mr. Speaker, this particular piece of legislation may not be perfect in form, but it does alleviate a lot of problems for the taxpayers, not only in the Halifax Regional Municipality, the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, all other municipal units, the hospitals, the universities, and yes, Mr. Speaker, as the President of the Federation of Labour has said, it'll free up money for the employees that work in private companies. That's a real issue, Mr. Speaker. It's a very detailed letter that he's subscribed a little more than a year ago. And I went through both letters, Mr. Speaker, and I couldn't see anything in substance in the second letter other than the apology that would lead me to believe that that this solvency test that he refers to is required. Because here's what the President of the Federation of Labour says. The solvency test is a hypothetical test. In other words, even he himself doesn't believe that this grow-in factor is a necessity. So why would the NDP want the Halifax regional taxpayers to pay another $20 million or $70 million in taxes over the next 5 years, over and above what they're paying now? Are they asking the people, the good people of the Halifax Regional Municipality, to pay more on their property taxes? More tuition? Absolutely. Higher hospital cost? What about all the other services that will be sacrificed, Mr. Speaker? We're not asking to sell out the workers, the employees of these companies, whether they be public or private. We are asking for a reasonable balance of fairness. And I did ask the previous speaker for one example in the province of Nova Scotia, and he hasn't been able to give me. He gave me Massey Ferguson from Ontario. I don't have all the particulars. He's talking Hawker Siddeley. Well, Mr. Speaker, if we were to look at the segment of pension plans, what they call windows and bio packages, There have been more packages for Sydney Steel than any other pension plan item that I know in any corporation, public or private, in the province of Nova Scotia. It seemed like every 5 or 10 years, 5 years, I would submit.
Order, please. The honourable member allow for an introduction.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member opposite for allowing me to do this introduction. I hate to interrupt him when he's in full form. And the riveting debate. Today in our West Gallery, we have visiting the House 20 students from Madeline Simons Middle School, along with the teacher Darren Doucette and a parent Cheryl Hurdle. And I think Darren Doucette is a relative of a former speaker. I think, am I right? Dennis, yeah. And if I could ask them to rise and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Certainly welcome our special guests to the gallery today and hope you enjoy the proceedings. Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton West has the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I heard the honourable member for Dartmouth North do some crackling down the corner there before on different issues. He himself, as a former employee at the local university, would certainly support this legislation. I mean, his colleagues, the employees as well as the employer, they all support it. How do you know? Well, Mr. Speaker, they've given indication that they support it. That's how I know. Much the same as HRM, much the same as the Federation of Labour, despite its flip-flop. Mr. Speaker, on page 2, it'll come. Here's what the President of the Federation continues to say. The elimination of the grow-in and the calculation of liabilities on a solvency basis would decrease the total solvency liabilities and bring them closer to the going concern liabilities, and it would eliminate or substantially reduce additional pension plan costs that are creating financial hardships for our members, unquote. Well, that's as clear can be. The Labour component of this province supports this legislation. And I wouldn't want to be fooled by this letter of apology that came at the behest of the NDP, because it seemed like they even knew it before the Minister of Labour knew it. The Minister of Labour didn't even have it in his department, and yet the previous speaker had it, and the letter was addressed to the Minister of Labour. So tell me that's not politics at play. That's not professionalism. That's not the way you deal with matters of public policy. Play political games, feed it to one political entity to try and embarrass or scoop the opposition. That's not what this is about. This is about protecting the workers and the companies in Nova Scotia from a very serious liability, and to help them grow and be prosperous. It doesn't matter whether they're a public institution or a private institution. We have some 140 plus private pension plans. I haven't seen any lineup or opposition, whether it be this legislation or the previous legislation. And yet they supported it. And the member for Halifax Fairview is saying they don't know what's going on. He said they don't know what's going on. Well, being bright is a relative term, let me tell you. Mr. Speaker, it's the facts. It's the facts, Mr. Speaker, on this particular piece of legislation that matter. And I know this hurts the NDP to be embarrassed publicly about the fact that the Labour component in both private industry and public institutions are offside with them. They don't want to be paying more cost. They don't want to be paying higher taxes. They don't want to be put in a vulnerable position like the NDP would have you believe is a good place to be. We have to be responsible. because many of these large institutions, we're dealing with taxpayers' money. And we can't discuss this in such a haughty fashion as if, well, this money is just going to grow on a tree, or somebody's going to go down the hall and print it on a print press and bring some more up here. It doesn't happen that way. Well, Mr. Speaker. The reality is the money is not there. And the people, the taxpayers, whether it be in the Halifax Regional Municipality, the Cape Breton Regional Municipality, Kings County, Hants County, Digby County, they don't want to pay higher taxes just to satisfy the NDP. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one thing that we have to realize is that this multi-employer pension, like with regards to multi-employer pension plans, in other words, the ones that are administered by unions, they were removed from the requirement to pay grow-in provisions in 2003 as a result of lobbying from labor unions. Well, that's not what they would have us believe here today. They would not have us believe that here today. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm just waiting with bated breath for the next orator from the socialist cause to stand up and explain why they want to increase the property taxes for the people of the Halifax Regional Municipality by as much as $70 million. Well, isn't it great to want to spend somebody else's money? Isn't it great to put the employees, not just the employers, but the employees in such a vulnerable state? Well, if anybody should be doing more research, it's on the analysis of the leadership that's coming from certain quarters, that they would say, and the previous Minister of Labour, Mr. Speaker, we may not agree with everything he says. I mean, we do take issue with the odd particular item that comes before the floor. But this issue on the pensions, I'm sure he could stand in his place and he could give in great detail some of the representations that have been made by the Federation of Labour on this particular issue. Prior to the opening of the House, Mr. Speaker, on several occasions, the President of the Federation of Labour made appointments to come and brief members of the Liberal caucus on Labour-related matters, only to cancel the appointments and never show up. So how pressing were these matters for him? How pressing was it? Or was he too busy going to NDP caucus meetings? Now, whose interests are being served here? The workers or the NDP? Seems to me that letter of apology dated October 7th, 2004, it's the NDP. So they want to talk about contributions. Don't stray too far away from home. We know who's funded by who. On balance, Mr. Speaker, I see no compelling argument to oppose this particular piece of legislation. If the previous speaker had provided members of the House with some point specific that we could relate to, then I'm sure we would be open to that. We're fair-minded in this caucus. We will certainly look at that. But, Mr. Speaker, you know, I often wonder if there's still that element of the extreme left-wing socialist view that is permeating from the province of Saskatchewan. And this was recently updated on their website less than 2 years ago. And that is on the principles of the New Democratic Party one of the prime objectives is to eliminate any and all forms of capitalism. And the member for Halifax Fairview admits that it is on the website, and that's what they subscribe to. See? So that's what the people of Nova Scotia have to know when they warm up to the NDP, because what you see ain't what you get. It's not. It's not, Mr. Speaker, because they'll spend people's money until there's nothing left and more. Mr. Speaker. So this issue, this pension bill 129, does bring a balance. It brings a sense of fairness and realization to what's happening in the marketplace, and not just at the universities. Well, Mr. Speaker, the member for Dartmouth North says he would like to put the property taxes up for the people of HRM by supporting this bill. Well, let him do that. Let him get up and defend himself on it.
Order, please. I'll member for Dartmouth North on point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a point of order, I wonder if the honourable member would entertain a question. And the question is
The member for Dartmouth North on the question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess today is question period, and I know that you made reference to that earlier. My question to the honourable member would be, is that it's obvious that the New Democratic Party never held the government of the province of Nova Scotia. So I'm wondering who created the debt of the province of Nova Scotia, or who were the contributing factors?
No, member Cape Breton West.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I can summarize that in 2 words. John Buchanan. But let's not go into history.
Order, please. Honourable Minister of Education.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Speaker. There is no question there was a debt run up in the province by governments, and I would think that he wants to take a look or start throwing stones about debt. He may choose to take a look at what was rung up by the government of which he was a member before we took office.
Now, member Cape Breton West has the floor.
Yes, he's quite correct, Mr. Speaker, when he says that the interest charges on the province that were left by the previous Conservative administration were so horrific that no matter what any government would do, we were still in trouble. That's why the bonding agencies down in New York had put us on death watch after the Buchanan administration had finished.
Order, please. All member Colchester North on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I believe the honourable member is misleading the House. And as he well knows, that Standard & Poor that has lowered our bond rating and or increased our bond rating and to an A+, I believe. Anyway, when we took over as government, the former government was running $500 million deficit per year. And Mr. Speaker, in the last 3 years, we have balanced the budget 3 times. Here.
On a point of order, but it's certainly a disagreement of facts amongst members. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
We will put it in perspective, Mr. Speaker. With the debt that this government has right now, we are paying $125,000 an hour in interest payments on the debt. $125,000, and he wants an A+ for addition? I would say, Mr. Speaker, he should be speaking on this bill too. He should be very concerned about this particular piece of legislation. Well, Mr. Speaker, that's true. Bill number 129. Been there, done that. Mr. Speaker, we thought that Friday morning would be rather mundane and surreal, but it's not. It's turning out to be a little more lively than one anticipated. But, Mr. Speaker, I would like to conclude my remarks that we support this particular piece of legislation because it's a good piece of legislation. The legislation that was passed in the 1980s in Ontario, just for the benefit of the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto was certainly passed when the Ontario economy was quite robust. Of course, that's just before a socialist government took over. And although the grow-in provision may have been an acceptable expense in Ontario at that time, the economic changes made the grow-in provision very expensive for both the employers and the employees. And I do believe the honourable member would have to agree with that. And that's the reality. That's the reality of the marketplace, Mr. Speaker. And so unless there's something earth-shattering that's going to come forth from future speakers from the NDP caucus, I'd see little alternative but to certainly support this bill going on to law amendments and hearing from the public and various stakeholders as to what their thoughts on it. Because I think it's the fair-minded thing to do, and not to get bogged down with some kind of a political agenda going on between the Federation of Labour and his relationship to the NDP caucus. And their socialist view that seems to be contrary to the principles of capitalism. So with that, Mr. Speaker, we will be supporting this bill going on to law amendments.
Thank you. Recognize the member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You'll get some learned point.
I'm pleased to rise today to speak to the Pension Benefits Act. It certainly is always a challenge following the member for Cape Breton West, because when one is untrammeled by the facts and undisturbed by logic, it's amazing what flights of oratory one can actually reach, Mr. Speaker. So now, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to bring us back down to the ground, back to the facts, back to this bill, back to some version of reality. This bill has been before the House before. Now, it's always a peculiar thing when you see a bill that was before the House before and was not approved by this House coming forward again. But it wasn't a standalone bill, Mr. Speaker. The government tried to make it part of last year's Financial Measures Act, and they ran into some fairly heavy weather because they realized that it was problematic. Now, at the time, I remember saying it was problematic for more than the reason that it was objectionable, which it was, but simply that the Financial Measures Act has been misused and abused by this government, so they're throwing things in that have nothing to do with the budget, have nothing to do with public finances, because their theory is that if it's in the Financial Measures Act, the opposition can't vote against it because somehow if it's part of the Financial Measures Act, it's a confidence motion. So what they've started doing, or have been doing for a number of years now, is putting stuff in the Financial Measures Act that just doesn't belong there. And this was one provision, because all it does is affect private pension plans, or public pension plans too, but not the province. It has no impact whatsoever on the finances of the province, because in one of those peculiar ironies, the province's own pension plan is exempt from this provision. So it has no impact on the province's finances, and yet they put it in the Financial Measures Act. Well, as I said, Mr. Speaker, it ran into some heavy weather, and they decided they had to pull it. And at the time, as I recall, the Liberals said that they were in agreement with that. But, Mr. Speaker, with the Liberals, there's only two things that you can really count on. And one is that when the chips are down and the going gets rough, they're going to be on the side of money. And the second thing is that you can always count on with the Liberals is that you can't count on them to be consistent at all. So in the spring, they had one position, and now in the fall, their position is different. It's the opposite, as we've come to expect from the Liberal Party. Flip, flop, flip, flop. You never quite know where they stand from one day to the next, 1 week to the next, 1 month to the next. I think we all remember in the last sitting of the House where from 1 hour to the next, the Liberals were expressing different positions out in the lobby, which was fairly embarrassing, I think, for the Liberal leader at the time. And just another example that's very much in my mind as we come to this Sunday shopping plebiscite is the Liberal Party was foursquare for full open Sunday shopping in the session of the House where the plebiscite was approved, and now the person who is certain to be their next leader says that he's against it. So does that mean now that the whole Liberal caucus is now going to be against what they spent a lot of their political capital last year arguing they were for? It's so hard to know where you stand with the Liberal Party these days, Mr. Speaker. And just because one of them is for something, you don't know if the rest of them are for it. And if one person's against something, you don't know if the rest of them are against it. You just, with the Liberals, you just have no idea where they stand. So I sincerely hope that after their leadership convention, that they will be a little less chaotic, a little less in disarray, a little more reliable, perhaps, so that if one of them expresses a view, we can have some confidence that the next day that will still be the Liberal caucus view. But on this particular provision, Mr. Speaker, they flipped and flopped, and now they're for it, apparently. Well, what's different about this bill from what was before the House in the spring? The answer, Mr. Speaker, is nothing. I diligently compared this bill to what was removed from the Financial Measures Act in the spring, and it's identical, word for word, comma for comma, period for period. It's exactly the same thing that the government withdrew in the spring. Now that is very strange, because when the government was pitching this bill to us before the House sat, they said that it was to deal with certain specific pension plans where the argument could be made that there was no realistic possibility of their being wound up, and therefore having a benefit that was contingent on a wind-up was unrealistic and unnecessary. And in fact, I think that's the rationale why the province's plan is exempt, because, I mean, to all intents and purposes, despite the loose language that gets used in this House and elsewhere, a province can't go bankrupt. It's simply not possible. A province can be in severe financial difficulty, but that's a completely different thing from what it means, what it really truly means to be bankrupt. A province cannot be bankrupt. A province can't go out of business. A province can't disappear unless our constitution changes. And so you can say, well, the pension plan of the province, therefore, can't be wound up. The province goes on. As long as we have a Canada, there will be a Nova Scotia. The province goes on. And so you can't say there's going to be even a possibility of a wind-up of the province's pension plan. Now, other organizations have come forward and said, well, the same rationale applies to us. And the Halifax Regional Municipality is one of them, and I understand Dalhousie is the same. And there are other public or quasi-public institutions that feel that there's no realistic chance of their ever being wound up, so this is an unnecessary expense. And you know, Mr. Speaker, that's a fair point. But it's one that needs to be examined closely and debated in this legislature. And it's one that I think our caucus is at least willing to entertain if that's what this bill did. But it's not. Now, you'll remember, Mr. Speaker, that what I said was that when this government was pitching this bill to our caucus, they said that it accomplishes a particular thing. And it came to some surprise to our members, I know, because I told them and saw the look of disbelief on several of their faces, because they believed when the government introduced this bill earlier in the week that it applied only to the HRM or at most to municipalities. And I looked at it and I said, no, that's not what it does. It applies to every single pension plan in the province. And that came as a bit of a surprise, to say the least. A bit of a shock, really, Mr. Speaker, that the bill before us was so different from what the government said it was going to be. There should be no mistake about this. This bill applies to all pension plans in Nova Scotia. And so this benefit, well, it applies to all pension plans in Nova Scotia provided certain conditions are met. And we know what the conditions are. The minister's laid them out, and he's right. Under those certain conditions, these provisions apply. No, so it doesn't literally apply to every plan, because, for example, not every plan is a defined benefit plan. Some are defined contribution plans. And there are others, as my colleague pointed out, is if there aren't already in the plan early retirement provisions, well, then this wouldn't apply. But what we don't know, what none of us knows, I don't know, the member for Halifax-Chebucto doesn't know, the member for Halifax-Clayton Park doesn't know, the member for Cape Breton West doesn't know, but never ever let that stop him from standing up and speaking at length, is which plans exactly does this apply to? And Mr. Speaker, I had the good fortune earlier in my legal career of working under a gentleman who I respected very highly. I thought a very, very skilled individual, former politician, former conservative politician from Ontario. A great deal of respect for him. But one of the things that he said to me, was that whenever you're examining legislation, the key question is who loses. And any politician who doesn't know the answer to that question before they move a bill forward is making a big mistake. Because virtually every bill, somebody loses. You just have to be very clear about who it is to make sure that you're willing to accept that those people should lose something. And many civil servants will say, oh no, nobody loses, it's a win-win, everybody gains from this. That's almost never the case, even in unexpected ways. Mr. Speaker, some people suffer a loss from legislation. And the problem we have before us, the problem we in the NDP caucus have, is we have a bill before us and the government has never spelled out who the losers are. I don't think the members on that side of the House know who the losers are. Which plans exactly does this apply to? Which businesses in which constituencies? Which workers in which businesses in which constituencies are suffering a loss as a result of this bill? We don't know. We don't know. I don't think even the government knows. I am sure most of the members on that side of the House don't know. My point is not that I know and I'm going to reveal all, Mr. Speaker. The point is this bill should not move forward until we do know. Who are the losers? Are they in Antigonish? Are they in Shelburne? Are they in Waverly, Fall River, Beaverbank? Are they up in Port Hawkesbury or Guysborough County? I rather suspect that this bill applies to Stora, Mr. Speaker. I rather suspect it does. Don't know that for sure, but I rather suspect it does. Is it in Kings County or elsewhere in the Annapolis Valley? Is it in my constituency or Halifax Clayton Park? Or is it over in Dartmouth? Is it up in New Waterford or Sydney? Who are the people who are losing? We don't know, and this bill shouldn't go forward until we know the answer. So we're willing to accept the point, Mr. Speaker, that there might be some plans that have a reasonable argument that there's no realistic chance of being wound up, and so funding a provision that's dependent on wind-up is too expensive. But when you look at the plans that have actually come forward with that proposition, you have to say, well, how sure are we? Halifax Regional Municipality, Mr. Speaker, hasn't been around as long as Nova Scotia has. Heck, Halifax Regional Municipality has been around for, what is it now, 8 years?
Sandy Jolly created it.
The member for Dartmouth North, who's always very up on these things, says it's 10 years old in 2005. Okay, so the old city of Halifax disappeared. The old city of Dartmouth disappeared. The town of Bedford disappeared. The county of Halifax disappeared. Who's to say that HRM won't disappear someday? That we'll have another government that will abolish it or amalgamate it in a different way or undo the amalgamation. And if that happens, the pension plans could very well be wound up, or, I think what's more important, partially wound up. So HRM says, we'll never get wound up. Well, it's not hard in light of what the Liberal government did to the Halifax metro area not that long ago, Mr. Speaker, and what they could do again if we let them back, Mr. Speaker, if we let them back into government, who knows what they're going to get up to? Because I'll tell you one thing, Mr. Speaker, when they ran in 1993, they didn't run on municipal amalgamation. But they did it. A fundamental change in the way that municipal governments delivered in the Cape Breton Regional Municipality in Halifax. Did they run on that? Was that in their platform during the campaign in 1993? No, but 2 years later it was done. And with this crowd over here, the Liberals, always potentially being the government again, who knows what they're going to get up to, Mr. Speaker? Who knows? None of us has any idea. Think of how much they did without it being part of an election platform that they ran on. And so who's to say that Halifax won't disappear, or that their pension plan won't be wound up or partially wound up. Because, Mr. Speaker, I'll just name one workplace in HRM, or two, that are an illustration of the problem. What about the Cole Harbour Rehabilitation Centre? They were eliminated, their pension plan was wound up, and their municipal employees. So who's to say that even if all of HRM isn't wound up, that some part of it won't be? And I'll tell you another group, Mr. Speaker, that has a great deal of concern about this, the Amalgamated Transit Union. Okay, Mr. Speaker, there's all kinds of talk and plans about things that might happen to the transit system. With the support, apparently, of the Liberal Party, there's every chance that this government will redefine how transportation services are delivered in HRM through this Capital District Transportation Authority, Mr. Speaker. And if that happens, and transit is transferred over to this as yet to be created authority with undefined powers and undefined membership, undefined rules, Mr. Speaker, the transit pension plan could be wound up or partially wound up. There's nothing to say that it won't be, could easily be, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Same with Dalhousie.
Order, please. The honourable member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, because I appreciate your intervention, because I know that the members are deeply interested in what I'm saying. What about Dalhousie, Mr. Speaker? I mean, there's been talk for years about some kind of amalgamation with other universities. There was if you want to call it an amalgamation with tons, some people there see it as a takeover. People have talked about a University of Nova Scotia, a University of Halifax. You know, these institutions have histories, but things change. They get created. The School of Social Work was created, Mr. Speaker, each one with their individual history, but nothing is carved in stone. Things change. We were talking, the member for Timberley Prospect the other day was giving a very learned dissertation on the history of amalgamation of universities around the Maritime region, Mr. Speaker, which I found very interesting, very informative. But the point for my purpose is simply that things change. And no one can say that the Dalhousie plan won't at some point be wound up or partially wound up. And yet the premise of them asking for this change is that it can never happen. And what I don't understand, cannot understand about the government's approach to this issue, is that even if these institutions are raising a serious issue, even if they are, and let's say for the sake of argument that they are, this bill eliminates growing benefits for everybody, even private companies that are not at all in the same position as HRM or Dalhousie. Why are they doing that? If that's what they're getting at, which we have some sympathy for, if that's what they're getting at, to eliminate an expensive benefit for organizations that will never need it, why doesn't this bill say that? Because what this bill is something quite different, Mr. Speaker. The Mercer organization, to which my colleague for Halifax-Chebucto has referred, is on a national, even international campaign to eliminate growing benefits. They are worldwide actuarial consultants, and they make a very important part of the Mercer Group's business is giving advice to pension plans. And they, Mercer, are on a campaign to get rid of these benefits. I don't know why. Maybe they genuinely believe that workers don't need them. Maybe they genuinely believe that the benefit is outweighed by the cost. Maybe their compensation is somehow related to how much money they save a pension plan, Mr. Speaker, and so that if they eliminate these growing benefits, more money flows into their coffers. I don't know. I don't know why Mercer is doing this, but they're the ones who are behind this. And nobody should be under any illusions about that, Mr. Speaker. It is Mercer's, the Toronto-based international pension consulting organization, that is lobbying to have this done. But they're not doing it directly, they're doing it indirectly. And I guess the best example that we have, and this is only an example, Mr. Speaker, I don't mean this to be conclusive, but it as an illustration of what we're dealing with. There can be no better example than the fact that the letter that we received ostensibly from the mayor of the Halifax Regional Municipality came to us in a Mercer envelope. Okay? It came to us in a Mercer envelope, not an HRM envelope, a Mercer envelope. And if at some point any member elsewhere in this House doubts that, we'll table that. We'll table the envelope it came on, Mr. Speaker, and everybody will see that the people who are organizing this and put on the stamp and got the mayor to sign that and folded it and sent it to the NDP caucus and other caucuses was the Mercer organization. Okay, that's who's driving this. And that's the reason, Mr. Speaker, that explains better than anything why the government is proposing a bill that eliminates grow-in benefits for everybody, even though when you press them, they fall back on HRM, just like the member for Cape Breton West did, Mr. Speaker, who knows no more about the finances of HRM than this empty chair in front of me, Mr. Speaker, but that never stopped him. Okay, he refers to, when pressed on what he's saying, he always falls back on HRM. Well, you know what? If this bill was about HRM, I think we'd have something to work with. I think we could deal with some possible amendments and sort of craft it so it actually does what it's supposed to do. But it doesn't deal just with HRM. It deals with every qualifying pension plan, every pension plan that meets the conditions. And so I say again, Mr. Speaker, whose ridings are those workers in? Is it in the member for Eastern Shore's riding? Or Guysborough? There's somewhere, Mr. Speaker, we're fooling ourselves that we think there are no workers out there who are losing in this bill. People are losing benefits. They're losing a real benefit that benefited the workers of Hawker Siddeley, that benefited the workers of the Ultramar refinery, Mr. Speaker. Real people have received real benefits under this provision, and we're told that on average, one pension plan per year is wound up in such a way as to bring into force these provisions. Those are real people who are losing real jobs in real communities, and we're dealing with their very real pensions. Where are they? Who are they? We don't know. So why are we dealing with this bill? Because Mercer wants us to. Because Mercer wants the Liberals to. Because Mercer wants the Conservatives to. And what we're saying is, if we have an issue, let's deal with it directly. Let's not deal with Mercer's issue. Let's deal with the issue of the people of Nova Scotia. And if there's no realistic chance of a pension plan being wound up, that's fine. We'll accept that. Although for the reasons I've outlined, Mr. Speaker, that question is not as obvious or clear, even in the case of an organization like HRM, where real people in real communities with real jobs have lost their jobs and had their pension plan wound up and benefited from these provisions. Is that? No, I'm just wondering if that's a fact.
No.
Okay. I was getting some helpful advice from behind me, Mr. Speaker, that relates to some of the possible motivation of one of the parties, which is neither the NDP or the Conservatives, but that would be imputing motive. So I don't think that I should say that publicly, Mr. Speaker. So the question is, what needs to happen here before this bill can pass? The first thing the government needs to do is make it clear that the bill is not going to go forward in this sitting of the House. What they need to do is write a bill that reflects what they're actually saying in public, which is that HRM needs a fix. If HRM needs a fix, let's fix HRM. If this legislature can pass a bill, as it did earlier this week, dealing with a 30-foot strip of land in Tatamagouche, then we can deal with a specific pension plan, Mr. Speaker. We don't have to say that this rule applies to everybody or nobody, because after all, it already doesn't apply to the Nova Scotia Public Service Superannuation Plan. There are exceptions, there are exemptions. We can deal with that. If HRM's the problem, let's see a bill that deals with HRM. Okay, we'll deal with that. We'll work with you on that. We'll consider amendments. We may even propose some amendments. We'll consult the workers involved. We'll consult the corporate management involved, and we'll work with you on that. But that's not what this bill does. This bill eliminates a real benefit for all pension plans for all time everywhere in Nova Scotia, without anybody in this House knowing. I defy anyone in this House to stand up and tell me and tell the House exactly who it is that loses benefits under this bill. If anybody can do that, I invite them to stand up now. Okay? Tell me exactly which workers under which plans at which employers living in which constituencies are losing a benefit. I invite people to stand up. Anyone who knows that, over here in the Liberals, over there in the Conservatives, I invite anybody who knows that to stand up now.
I think you're getting a no. I think you're getting a no, Graham. No takers.
No takers.
No takers. No
Mr.
takers.
Speaker, I'm willing to cede the floor to somebody who will stand up and tell that to the House, but nobody is able to do that. So why is this bill going forward? Why are the Liberals so mad keen now to push this forward? Why are the Conservatives bringing back a bill that was rejected for the same reason in the spring? Why is it back before us? Why is the government saying publicly that it's about one thing, but it actually is about something else? Why is that, Mr. Speaker? This bill should not pass until the House has the answers. We need some real consultation. The Federation of Labour has not covered itself in glory with the way it has dealt with this issue. But what we do know is that their position now is that more consultation is needed. Mr. Speaker, that they have not, it is my information, that 5 months after the government first attempted to repeal this benefit, they have not sat down yet with the Federation of Labour to discuss it. What we need to know is how many unions have been consulted, how many employers have been consulted. And we need to have a consultation with all the plans that are going to lose under this bill to see if they're okay with it. Because frankly, Mr. Speaker, some of them will be. Some of the unions involved, I'm sure, are willing to look at the trade-off between the amount they're paying into the pension plan and the benefits they get in return. And different unions will come to different conclusions about that. But we have to give them a chance to do that. And then the government's not doing that. Why? I don't understand it. I can't understand it. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, I just don't understand this government. We need to know, as I've said a number of times, because it's important, we need to know who loses in this bill, who wins, how much, where are they? And until we know that, we shouldn't be pushing this bill forward. We need to know why this bill can't be crafted to deal with the issues that have actually been raised. The mayor, in the letter written for his signature by Mercer's and mailed on his behalf by Mercer's, raises some interesting points about very detailed and very technical points for things like how solvency is...
Please, the Honourable Deputy Premier, on a point of order.
Speaker, on a point of order, I guess, more of a question than a point of order, but is the honourable member inferring that that Mercer's wrote the letter for the mayor?
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, I'm doing more than implying it or inferring it. I'm saying it. I'm saying it. Okay, Mr. Speaker, and so if that's and they raise some very interesting technical points, many of which don't need to be dealt with in legislation. If there's a problem with the way that solvency is calculated, well then deal with that. Deal with the way solvency is calculated. Deal with the way the superintendent of pensions deals with solvency. But there are many issues in that letter that can be dealt with without the necessity of legislation. But the core issue that HRM is asking us to do is they're saying get rid of growing benefits. And we're saying if that's the problem, let's deal with it. Let's deal with HRM and not deal with HRM's problem by eliminating the possibility of growing for 140 other plans. Mr. Speaker, I know members will regret to know that my time is running short, but I did have one other thought that I wanted to say, just to give members a preview of what I'm going to say when I resume on this topic. And that is that one of the very important things that needs to be dealt with here, the sort of unstated issue, is the health of private sector pension plans in Nova Scotia. Earlier this week, the Auditor General of Alberta released his annual report. And 3 of the chapters in that report deal with the oversight of private pension plans by the Superintendent of Financial Institutions in Alberta. And Mr. Speaker, it's a very stinging critique of the inability of the Office of Financial Institutions in Alberta to adequately supervise pension plans in that province. And some pretty tough recommendations are made just about how the regulator is supposed to bring itself up to scratch so that everybody knows what's going on. There are some real problems with private pension plans in Nova Scotia, and we need to know what they are before we go about changing the rules that govern them. We need to reassure ourselves that our superintendent of pensions is not suffering from the same problems as the superintendent of financial institutions in Alberta, Mr. Speaker, because if we are, then we've got a much, much, much bigger problem than grow-in benefits. So, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to discussing that point at length when I next speak on this topic. But on that note, with the understanding of certainly of the government, Mr. Speaker, I move that debate on this bill be adjourned.
Motion is to adjourn debate. Is that agreed? Agreed. The Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations on introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to bring to the attention members of the House today in the West Gallery we have a group of students, and I assume these are the right group of students from Madeline Simons Middle School. Is that right? Nod, yes. And some parents and teachers who are participating, watching the debate today, and I'd ask members to give them a warm welcome from the House.
So we welcome our guests to the gallery today. Thank you, and the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, could we have the cooperation of the House to return to the order of business reports, tabling reports for committees?
Presenting reports of committees. Agreed? Agreed. Presenting reports of committees, the Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill 102, an act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 1994, the Maintenance Enforcement Act. Bill 115, an act respecting the Maritime Provinces Higher Education Commission. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendment. There's more. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am further directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill. Bill 116, an act to amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Or these bills refer the committee and the whole House on bills.
Yes? Okay. Mr. Speaker, as Chair of the Committee on Law Amendments, I am further directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill 95, an act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2001, the Land Registration Act. Bill 101, an act to amend Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Public Service Act, to establish the Office of African Nova Scotian Affairs. Bill 107, an act to monitor the prescription of certain drugs. Bill 121, an act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act. The committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Or these bills be referred to the committee and the whole House on bills. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I am further directed by the Committee on Law Amendments to report that the committee has passed the following resolution. That the Committee on Law Amendments requests funds to enable the committee at a time and place to be determined to go to Sydney to hear the people's concerns respecting Bill 97, an act to change the name of University College of Cape Breton and to amend Chapter 484 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the University College of Cape Breton Act, and related statutes. And those are all my reports for today, Mr. Speaker.
Obviously, the bills that were reported, I believe they've all been committed to the whole House on bills, and the report that's just been tabled by the Honourable Minister is tabled. The Honourable Minister, Deputy Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I move the House to now rise to meet again on Tuesday at the hour of 2 p.m. The House will sit from 2 p.m. until 10 p.m. or until such time as we have no further business to conduct, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the order of business on Tuesday will be primarily public bills in committee of the whole House. We will also have some bills for third reading, some bills for second reading. And, Mr. Speaker, I move now that the House do now rise, and I hope every member has a pleasant weekend. Thank you.
Motion is the House adjourn till 2 p.m. on Tuesday. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Counterminded nay. Motion is carried. We wish all the members a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend, safe trip home, and we'll see you next week.